Hello, good parishioners. This is day number 80 of the Bible in a Year, and it happens to be the last day of this section, this part of the Bible where we did the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy. It was the desert wanderings, and so tomorrow we'll start, day 81 starts another section which is called Conquest and Judges. And so I recommend, as always, when you start this new part of the Bible in a Year, according to this Bible timeline that Jeff Cavins invented, there's a wonderful introduction at the beginning of each of these sections with Father Michael Schmitz interviews or talks with Jeff Cavins himself. And so that's a nice thing to listen to, always about 10-15 minutes of explanation of what we're, looks like it's a half an hour this time, explanation of what we're getting into next, starting tomorrow, with this new part. But this desert wandering section and the book of Numbers, chapters 35 and 36, it has more laws, as you can imagine. We're in the book of Numbers. It speaks of the distinction between murder and manslaughter, which is a beautiful thing. They had laws that were more fair, perhaps, than in other countries, and the fact that they had to have these improved laws shows that there was really a terrible kind of murderous attitude or society in the ancient Near East. We like to say now that we're a litigious society. Everybody's suing each other, but back then everyone would kill each other. So it was worse. And so even someone who killed someone accidentally, the response would be murder. Would kill, so that was kind of what was done in other countries. But here the Israelites are being taught by God, to have an improved sort of a law. And so that's what's described there in this little section here, verse 16 of chapter 35 and following it kind of distinguishes between manslaughter and murder. It says that if someone kills someone accidentally, then it's just manslaughter, and the person doesn't have to be killed, is not put to death, but rather is kind of put in a separate city, one of these cities of refuge, so that the avenger, which is the goel, or the kind of the kinsman redeemer, the person who was going to come after you if you killed their relative, that they would be protected from this kind of avenger. So they would go to these cities of refuge, and they would stay there until the death of the high priest, as it says in verse number 25. And that's interesting. My footnote here says something very interesting. It says that the rationale behind this is that death makes atonement for death. So normally, if you kill someone, someone has to die. You have to die. You have to be put to death. But in this case, it says that the manslayer is innocent of murder. He just killed someone accidentally. He has to go to the city of refuge, and he has to stay in that city of refuge, kind of like a sort of a temporary sort of a prison or a city where he has to go and stay there until the death of the high priest. So until the high priest would sit in the chair of Moses for life. It was kind of a lifetime, kind of like the Pope. So until the next pope comes along, you've got to stay in that city of refuge. So it was kind of you had to stay there so that you'd be protected from these avengers. And kind of the rationale, as it says here in this footnote, is that the rationale is that death makes atonement for death. And so, but the high priest's death is sufficient for this person who was just killed someone accidentally. When the high priest dies, then he's freed. And supposedly, St. Ambrose, in his writings in the ancient early church, he said that allegorically this kind of represents Christ, because Christ is the true high priest. And when he died, he freed all of us from our guilt. And so that's kind of a sort of a type of Christ that we find here in verse number 25 of chapter 35. So this really is pointing to the fact that the Israelites really believe that human life is so sacred. You can't take someone's life, and if you do, there's some serious consequences, even if it's an accident, and there are consequences. There's an interesting little detail in verse 31, and that is that that you can't just pay someone off. If you killed someone, you can't just pay someone off. They accept no ransom. You shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer. And what this is saying is that money can't buy freedom for a manslayer. When a human life has been lost, even if accidentally. So if you kill someone accidentally, you can't just pay money to sort of get free and get out of jail free or get out of the city of refuge free. There had to be something more than that. It's not just money. And that's pointing to this belief that the Israelites had that human life is in the image of God, and it has much greater dignity, far surpassing that of animals or property or, silver coins or, any kind of animal thing that you might want to use to buy your freedom. If you've killed someone, there is some serious consequences because a human life is sacred because it's in the image and likeness of God. And then we come to the end of the Pentateuch in the last chapter of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, the death of Moses. Finally, Moses is dying, and he gets to feast his eyes on the Holy Land from Mount Nebo. I remember going on a pilgrimage a year or so ago with our parishioners, actually, and we looked across opposite Jericho down into the valley and saw even Jerusalem on the other side, on the far horizon, on the hills of the hill country of Judea. And we looked down just like Moses did. And anyway, it says Moses was 120 years old, but his eyes were not dimmed and his natural forces were not abated. He had this extraordinary grace of still being, vigorous even in his old age. But he did die, and that was. And then there's these words about how he had put he had laid his hands on Joshua to give Joshua a bit of his Holy Spirit, of the Holy Spirit. It says Joshua in verse 9, Joshua was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. That's again a sort of a type of what we believe in. The Bible's all full of that that there's like a position or there's an office. The person's office is empty when he dies. Someone else has to take his place. So it's an institutional religion. Even in the Old Testament, God never left his people without leaders. And so Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. And then it says in verse 10 that there had not risen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. No one was like Moses, it's saying. Moses was the greatest. It says none, for all his signs and wonders and all that he did, the great and terrible deeds that he wrought. So Moses was the greatest. But we know that Moses was so close to God that he knew God face to face, as it says. But we remember that back in chapter 18, verse 15, there was that famous line where Moses said that the Lord will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, and he you shall listen to, him you shall heed. And so there's going to be someone who's going to see God face to face even more than Moses. And in fact, he was the face of God, that Jesus Christ is the prophet truly that was sent. And he's like Moses, a new Moses, but he is the face of God, in fact.